All right, everybody. Welcome to our meeting today. Let me get this. Oh, I need to share my screen. That would help. Steps here. Okay, guys, can you guys see my screen?
Yep. Yes.
Yes. Perfect. Okay, we are going to get started today so we can get done on time. And today, doing the prayer for us is Nelson.
All right. Are we ready?
We are.
All right. Dear Lord Heavenly Father, we thank you again for this day, for this beautiful weather that we're enjoying right now. In all this good weather and all these good times, I know that you must be disappointed in us for all the troubles that we are having. We've left our country in bad shape. We've got troubles around the world, but you've given us Rotary. And through Rotary, we can reach out all around the world and work for peace and work for harmony and with each other. So it's for that peace that we pray. In your holy name, amen.
Amen. And then Nelson, if you would lead us in the pledge.
Got it. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Thank you, Nelson. Other than our speaker, are there any other guests with us today? I don't think I saw any, but okay. Our mission for Rotary is on the screen. Some stats about our club. And then some of the organizations that we support and love with our donations. We are celebrating Rotary anniversaries this year, and based on what Rotary International has, these are our 4 members that are celebrating a Rotary anniversary in September. So I know, Jeff, you're with us. I show 44 years, and Lynn is with us today on the phone. And Lynn, I show 5 years this September for you. Does those sound about right?
Yeah, it's actually, I think, 9. The other 4 years were in outlying areas and they haven't been rolled over for some reason. So,
all right. So we need to work on that, Lynn. I'll see what I can do to get that updated. Jeff, does that sound right for you? 44 years?
That is correct. And I think Bob Hurst is 46 whenever his anniversary will be.
Yeah, we'll get to him. We'll get to him eventually. And when his month is with here. So yeah, he beats you by a couple of years. Okay.
Bob is our remaining charter member.
Yes. Yep. You'll see that on his road. I don't think Jim is with us, so I'll make sure I put this back in next week. But we did get a nice thank you from on Buckner Shoes for all of our work we did on shoes for orphan souls. So we had 367 pairs of shoes we donated. So really nice work by Jim every year on leading that for our club. Of course, we have our golf tournament coming up September 20th. We have about 64 golfers confirmed. We'd like to hit 100 to hit all of our fundraising goals for the year. So please do take time, go out to kcirotaryclub.com and go out to events and register for the tournament. You can also go out to kcirotaryclub.com and go to membership and go to the weekly membership meeting. And that's where you can register to volunteer at the event as well, if you're not golfing that day. Oh, and this is just showing where you can either go donate a gift basket or volunteer. If you just go out to membership and click on the weekly membership sign up meeting, that's where you can go volunteer. We also, we have a 5th Wednesday in September. We are going to Cactus Creek Croquet Club, 6 to 8 p.m. that evening. And so we will have an outing that evening where we'll be able to get together in person. So that will be a lot of fun. And Chris will send out more details on that, I'm sure, as it gets closer. And then we still have our family in Hillcrest Apartments. So send a note of encouragement to them. And I will stop and ask if we have any other club announcements. Okay. And then club business, membership renewal, I should be wrapping that up. I still need to hear from a few people. So if you've not responded to the KCI Rotary email address yet, letting me know what your membership is going to be for the 2021-2022 year, please let me know. Hope to get that over to our CPA and get the billing out, hopefully as early as next week. So I'll be wrapping that up this week. And with that, I have our row to introduce, which is Bob Hurst. And we already know his fun fact. He is one of the remaining charter members of the KCI Rotary Club. And so there's a little bit about Bob. And I am now going to let Bob introduce our speaker today.
So you're going to drop your screen share.
I will here in a second.
Okay, here. All righty, very well. Okay, Rochelle Daniels is Assistant Superintendent at North Kansas City School District. She graciously accepted an assignment in my Sunday school class a few weeks ago and did a splendid job of presenting a really complex subject. She's been in the district for 22 years, started in the classroom at Oak Park, worked her way up through the administration. Among the items on her resume that always impresses me is she worked on redefining attendance boundaries. And anyone who's has managed an attendance boundary project has really done something, in my opinion. But she did a really even-handed job with critical race theory in our Sunday school class, and I thought you might appreciate seeing her presentation. So I will turn it over to Rochelle Daniels.
All right, and I'm going to stop sharing, Rochelle, and you should be able to share now.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here today. I really enjoy coming to your meetings when I get the chance to, and I always like to talk about good things going on in North Kansas City schools. Today, however, I'm going to try my best to go back to my days as a history teacher at Oak Park High School, and I'm going to present you with a topic that I don't want you to be able to understand where I lie on the issue. I want you to just see it very plainly for what it is. We'll be talking all about critical race theory, which as a school district, we've heard quite a bit from those on either side of it. So I'll give you the perspective and then allow you some time to ask some questions and just for us to have a little discussion as we go. I'm going to start sharing my screen with you here. We'll get going. Okay, are you able to see that? Yes?
Yes.
Great. Okay. We'll begin just by understanding what critical race theory even is. Here we go. There. This is the outline of where we'll head. We'll talk about what it is. We'll look at support for the concept. We'll talk about what opposition there is to it, why it's coming up right now. Why are we hearing anything about it? And then we'll finally end with how there truly is nothing new under the sun. This isn't something that has appeared out of nowhere. So let's start with what it actually is. It truly is a legal framework that examines how policies and the law perpetuate systemic racism. So again, a legal framework. The father is considered to be Derek Bell. And then these two individuals, Kimberly Crenshaw and Richard Delgado, honed it further in the 1980s. So Derek Bell, the father, initiated the thinking in 1970s, and then these two added on to it at Harvard Law School as a body of thought. It was truly written in dissertation style, an academic journal. It's not readily accessible by the common person because of its complex language. It really started as a system of questioning, as good scholarship does. It looked on its face to be about legal equality. Why do we still have so much racism? The idea that Derek Bell, Crenshaw, and Delgado started with was, we've had the civil rights movement and the passage of civil rights legislation that should, in fact, equal legal equality. But they continue to ask the question, why didn't that translate into de facto equality overall? So again, legal scholars really asked, why is there racism in the law and what can we do to combat that? So again, not a way of thinking, but a way of questioning overall. This quote then reminds us that the premise of critical race theory is that race is embedded into systems and institutions, and those systems and institutions actually replicate racial inequality. And the idea behind the theory is it's not just individual bias nor prejudice that contributes to racism. It truly is something that's woven into the fabric of our very being. The other ideas that were presented as part of this critical race theory questioning was that structural racism exists in our economics, in our politics, and in education. And again, that emphasis was, this is without individual racist intent. It truly is structures embedded into society. Another piece that's important to understand about the original theory is that there's a difference between race being seen as a social construct as opposed to a biological construct. And proponents of critical race theory will tell you that race as a social construct has led to a caste system with those of color at the bottom. And they reference the Human Genome Project that was conducted in 2003. It was an international and collaborative research project that mapped and tried to understand all of the genes of human beings. And if you're wondering what that number might be, it's between 25,000 and 30,000 altogether. And in what they found as part of the Human Genome Project, there was no specific marker for race. So again, the questioning began, is race just a social construct alone rather than a biological construct? At the time, you also saw the rise of postmodernist thought. And this type of thinking is skeptical of any explanation which claims validity for all groups, all cultures, all traditions and races. It really starts to say there are no universal values and that knowledge and success are not based on individual merit alone. So those influences started to shape the thinking of applying questions to, again, why racism particularly existed in the law. So now we'll delve a lot deeper into the support, the side where people apply this thinking and say that yes, racism is systemic throughout our culture. First, let's take a look at the data. A lot of times proponents of critical race theory will start here and they'll reference figures such as Blacks currently make up 14% of the total population of the United States, but they make up 40% of the prison population. 7% of Black women in the United States comprise 7% of women in the United States are Black, but they comprise 75% of those who are evicted out of their homes. And then lastly, Black and brown children living in poverty currently make up more than 50% of that figure. Another piece of data that's often referenced, particularly in education, is the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Now, what I'm going to show you here, since we had some delay in standardized testing with the pandemic, I'm going to show you 2019 data, and this is specific to math. When you look at the NAEP, a national assessment again, 44% of white 8th graders were deemed proficient or advanced. We contrast that with 20% of Hispanics who were, and then 14% of Blacks. Again, 8th graders, and this is specific to math. Data also tells us that Black and Brown students are more likely to be disciplined, receive harsher infractions. They're less likely to be placed in advanced gifted programs, those that enrich. Their life expectancy is lower and their income is lower. Proponents, again, of critical race theory speak to the systems then that have caused those results, that data that I just showed you. And the first picture here takes us back to the era of chattel slavery, in which laws and policies prevented enslaved people from learning to read. And again, the thinking behind that was that access to literature would empower them to question the bondage that they were in at the time. You've also probably remembered your history classes, Jim Crow laws. Those were in existence for about over 100 years on the whole. And through those, laws were made in which Blacks in particular were prevented from voting or holding office. They had to take separate literature tests in some cases. They were separate from whites in public spaces. I'm sure you've recognized some of these pictures from textbooks. Our own history here in Kansas City also speaks to some of the Jim Crow laws and vestiges of those. J.C. Nichols, he utilized deed restrictions. Now that was a common practice in the era, but it really was much more common on the coasts in the East and the West. This is an example of one that specified again that Negroes as owners or tenants were restricted. Now, other parts of deed restrictions regarded the size of the lots, the house design, how far back from the street they could be. But again, this example is one in which the city council then put together zoning ordinances that did restrict Blacks to the east side. And if you've been in Kansas City for very long, you know that then Troost became a line of color throughout the city. This was not unique to our area though. On the Kansas side, the Crow brothers also had these deed restrictions in place. And I'll give you a second just to take a look at this. You can see here that no one of Jewish nor Middle Eastern descent, except for servants, were allowed within this deed restriction. It is important to note that in 1948, a Supreme Court decision with Shelley versus Kramer struck down the racial restrictions in housing. And as you likely know, homes associations then took some of that over. I found it to be interesting data that, again, that was 1948 when the Supreme Court case was decided. Prior to that, in 1900 to 1947, in Johnson County, there were 96% of all housing areas that had such deed restrictions. In Platte County, it was 74%, Clay County, 71%, and Jackson County, 62%. So then in 1948, when the Supreme Court decision was made, up through the 1960s, there were still 1,243 explicit racially restrictive covenants. And this is all from a Tulane researcher, Gotham, who tried to show that even though the Supreme Court decision had been made, it didn't result in immediate action. So again, proponents of critical race theory would tell you that it is systemic rather than individually based. Next, we'll go to our own situation here in Kansas City. This is a picture in 1955 when the Supreme Court ordered integration for the Kansas City, Missouri School District. And at that point, the KCPS, Kansas City Public Schools, they redrew their attendance boundaries. And then, as you probably recall, there was a desegregation case that was filed in 1977. It wasn't decided by the Supreme Court until 1995, but it did illuminate some racist practices there. By that point, white families on the whole had already gone to suburban districts or enrolled in private schools, and we still see some of the effects of that. Another term that I'd like to introduce as part of those who say that they support critical race theory is intersectionality. Proponents would tell you that it's not quite as simple as being black or white, that there's a rich explanation of belonging to different groups and locations, and it all can occur at the same time. The concept of intersectionality speaks to the ability to be black, a woman, a mother, a daughter, an American. So multiple identities can be recognized. Again, that's what proponents would have us look at rather than an issue that is real binary in nature. They would also have us draw our attention to the idea that history isn't quite so simple. It didn't just start with slavery, go to the Civil War. We had the Jim Crow Acts, the Civil Rights Act, and then, oh, everything's good. So again, proponents of critical race theory would tell you that this is systemic in nature throughout the nation, that it isn't just individuals who are bad apples to a certain degree. All right, so our next step then is to go on the other side, those who oppose critical race theory. And we'll take a look at that side of the issue now. Those who oppose the idea would tell you that a lot of the rhetoric demonizes whites for being the oppressors, that it makes children feel guilty for crimes of their ancestors, that they are the enslavers, and there's emotional harm being caused. Another thing that you'll hear from those who oppose critical race theory would be that the argument that you can't apply modern sensibilities to the past sins of the father. It was a different time, there was a different standard. Then in education, especially lately, we've had a lot of protests against what, again, opponents deem exposure to damaging and demoralizing ideas, that the US was founded on racism, or that achieving racial justice and equality requires discrimination against white people, or that whites are inherently privileged and did nothing of merit to earn that current status. That's something that they take great offense to as opponents of critical race theory. Here's a quote from, actually a letter to the editor, from an individual who's the executive director of a learning institution. And I'll give you a second to read that, but what it speaks to is lowering standards. Okay, so again, opponents of critical race theory would say you're not recognizing what value the individual brings, or that we have this ability to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps in America, and whatever success I enjoy is to my own credit. Okay, so the lowering of standards, particularly in education, has become a rallying cry for those who oppose critical race theory and its tenets. Another piece that's often brought up would be that it's unpatriotic, that those who support critical race theory want to tell a different version of the United States history. It's revisionist history, you may hear that term as well. So deeming it unpatriotic in nature. There's also a conflation with Marxism, that again, people who support critical race theory would rather destroy society and rebuild it altogether, and that would make us all better by working together in a classless society. And again, that's equated to Marxist beliefs. And then this sign represents a common piece for those who are against critical race theory. It would be the concept of being colorblind, ignoring a personal identification in the name of character. And some would claim that seeing color points out differences and further divides us rather than bringing us together and uniting us. So why now? Why are we hearing so much about this all of a sudden? Well, as you recall, the death of George Floyd certainly moved the line of scrimmage in some people's opinions, that it was no longer seen as just one bad apple, as one individual acting, that perhaps there were structures and systems that caused the effect that we saw with the murder of George Floyd. Again, you can see how that could be debated on both sides of the issue that I've presented to you so far. So that was certainly a linchpin for it. But I'd love to introduce you to a journalist named Christopher Rufo. Christopher Rufo was given a recorded equity training on Zoom, just like we're on now, from the city of Seattle in July of 2020. And the person who sent it to him, this recorded equity training, was upset about the use of terms like segregation, group-based guilt, and race essentialism. Race essentialism says that there are unalterable traits that are the essence of that race. And in that training, it was specifically talking about whites. Rufo studied the training, and he believed that what he was hearing there, and the term critical race theory was used as part of that training, he believed that it was related to Marxist critical theory. So critical race theory versus Marxist critical theory. They're both anti-capitalist in that thinking, and he thought they were one and the same then. He was quoted as saying that he was angry that liberals had taken over post George Floyd, and then that conservatives truly needed a war cry that they could rally around. So as he became more and more emboldened and upset about this concept that was being placed on Americans, he considered that war cry that they could rally around. He first thought about the term political correctness, but he found it to be dated and not quite big enough. Then he talked about cancel culture. And again, cancel culture is just ignoring or ostracizing someone as an expression of disapproval. Rufo believed that that didn't translate into a political program that he could rally individuals around. And then lastly, woke. Woke is a term you've probably heard, where it's just being alerted to injustices, aware of those. He thought that one was a little bit too broad and maybe didn't have enough depth of understanding for people who weren't familiar with the term. And that's when he decided that he had found the perfect villain in critical race theory. He said that that term allowed him to access the middle class, including racial minorities who saw the world as creative, not critical, individual, and not racial, practical, and not theoretical. So again, when you see critical race theory, he was showing that it's completely opposite how most people want to see the world, racial minorities included. He said that critical race theory connotes hostile, academic, divisive, race-obsessed, elitist, anti-American. And then what he loved most about it was that it wasn't an externally applied pejorative. He said it's the label that they've actually chosen for themselves, as he had lifted that from the training. I'll show you a couple of his tweets that outline some of that type of thinking. I'll give you a second to read those as well. Okay, so What Christopher Rufo then did with this information was he went on the Tucker Carlson show and he called on the president to ban trainings from the federal government. He was referencing what he had been sent from the city of Seattle. And on September 4th, 2020, this happened. President Trump did issue an executive order, and it ended up stopping funding for all federal trainings of that type. I should share with you that upon entering office, Biden did reverse that executive order and established a federal grant program for teaching U.S. history that reflects diversity, identities, histories, contributions, and experiences of all. He said he wanted to create an inclusive, supportive identity and safe environment. I should mention too that 39 senators and representatives sent a letter to the education secretary who said that this was a politicized and divisive agenda. As of today, we have 27 states, there are efforts in 27 states to restrict education of this type, any education that would include critical race theory. In Missouri, Representative Chuck Basie and then Senator Cindy O'Laughlin, they asked the governor for a special session on May 26th. A little bit further back in March, Senator Rick Bratton had filed Senate Bill 586 to ban the teaching of divisive concepts. It didn't make it to a vote before the regular legislative session, but a similar bill, Senate Bill 5, was introduced in a June special session that failed to advance. So while there wasn't much traction and movement this past session, we certainly expect it to be a hot topic coming up in this year. Places where things have been signed into law pertaining to critical race theory include Texas, Idaho, Iowa, Oklahoma, and Tennessee as well, current date. But that's ever changing and we know it will throughout this year. You may have seen on the news General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was under in the hot seat about this topic as well. And he ended up speaking to, yes, he studies critical race theory because he needed to understand white rage. And he said the U.S. Military Academy is a university. And if we are to defend against white rage, then we need to study it. He also made a statement saying that he read Mao Zedong, Karl Marx, Lenin, and he asked if that made him a communist. He spoke to the need for situational understanding for the country that we are to defend. So again, a lot of these things that I've just shared with you just shed light on the issue and brought more attention to the concept of critical race theory. So the last piece I wanted to talk with you before we have further discussion is just the fact that there's nothing new under the sun, as Ecclesiastes tells us. In the 1930s, the Daughters of the American Revolution and the American Legion warned of a subversive set of textbooks, and that's what you see right here. The question of equality and classes in America has been raised by these textbooks, according to speakers who came to school board meetings in New Jersey and Wisconsin. You should know then that those school boards in those two states did hold book burnings of the very textbook you see on the screen right now. In the mid-century, you saw a push to rid schools of socialist and Marxist indoctrination. So that's something that, again, is not a new concept. And then this photo was from a demonstrator in Charleston, West Virginia. In 1974, ELA, English Language Arts textbooks were approved by the state. And protesters said they were anti-Christian, anti-American, and anti-white in their scope. Another issue in our more recent past would be in the 90s, particularly when the inclusion of Black authors was deemed to reduce the English language to the language of the ghetto, according to some quotes. And at a certain point, empty school buses were shot and vandalized. There was dynamite exploded at the district headquarters. Again, this example was out of Virginia. And then in the 1990s, there was great discussion about should Black vernacular, or you may remember the term Ebonics, be allowed in schools. So again, not.
Did you shut that green door on there?
And then finally in 1994, there was a call for national history standards, a balance between American exceptionalism and patriotism, and acknowledging the country's history of violence towards indigenous people along with slavery. So revising history standards in that way. Again, these are examples throughout time, and critical race theory is certainly something that would fall in these categories where what we're teaching in public schools is questioned, let alone is it truly a systemic problem in nature. Now, I give you all that information about what critical race theory is, what proponents of it would tell you, what opponents of it say, why in the world it's come on our radar now, and then that this isn't brand new to America. And I ask you the following. First, could you name an element of the presentation that's kind of sticking with you? Something where you're thinking, ooh, that didn't feel right. Or it was a compelling piece where you thought, oh, I need to know more. Next, what question is still circling for you? What question is rattling in your mind as to, I also need more information in order to understand that? And then finally, what do you wish others knew? So I posed those 3 prompts to you just in hopes of getting a read on where you're at, especially because I can't be in the same room with you and feel your reaction and see your faces in quite the same way. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'd love to again just open it up into a discussion around it.
Well, this is definitely a very volatile situation. It's being taught in our schools, whether subtly or openly. But the thing that disturbs me on it is that rather than elevating anybody, it's pushing the whites down, making them feel guilty, which you alluded to, and teaching these children that they are not good because they have the white privilege. That's the most disturbing part to me, rather than the unity.
Other thoughts?
I'll just offer a comment that, and I think it's hard to deny that critical race theory grows out of critical theory. And I would challenge you to go to Wikipedia and look up critical theory and attempt to read the 2 short pages that are there. I think you will find it a challenging read.
Hey, Bob, you said you presented this to your Sunday school class. How old were the children and what was their?
Oh, no, this is an adult class that had 2
Okay.
school board members in it.
Oh, okay.
I did an awful lot of talking there, so I wanted to give a chance for your thinking to be reflected, and we'll continue that. But I do feel like it's important to just address, now shifting to, as a representative of North Kansas City schools, we've been questioned quite a bit about, do we teach critical race theory? We even had a sunshine request as of late that it searched through every email. It required us to evaluate all curricular documents, any mention of the term critical race theory, and then quite a few others that terms such as equity that have gone along with it. And in our curricular documents, there wasn't one reference to those. Now, I will say on the flip side of that, we do have some of the data that I represented in the beginning, where we see some disparate outcomes for our students of color. And so there are efforts that we certainly make in order to rectify that. But as far as teaching critical race theory in our classrooms, quite frankly, it's much too complex of a topic. It's not appropriate for K-12 instruction. And we're able to prove that through the sunshine request. But it certainly is a heated issue still, and it's something that we've got to plainly explain to parents so that they know what we are and are not talking about in our classrooms.
What's the influence from NEA?
It's a topic that we talk with them a lot about because they're concerned too, just as to where is the line? What can a teacher say and not say outside of the curriculum in particular, or what their own personal beliefs, how those enter the classroom. And I'll tell you, as a former social studies teacher, when I would teach world religions, you can't proselytize, you can't come in and try to indoctrinate. And so we've taken that same approach with any personal beliefs that teachers have in the classroom today too, regarding this. Do you have other reactions, questions, thoughts? I know it's heavy.
I can't believe Phil doesn't have something to say.
Any other questions for Dr. Daniels?
No more questions, but since I've already monopolized, I just want to say thank you. I thought the presentation was very neutral and very well done. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I really appreciated being invited. Again, it's always nice to see you all. Thank you.
One quick question. Do you have any data on how the schools in let's say the Kansas City, Missouri district react to this as opposed to the, to the more suburban schools?
Our superintendent is a part of the cooperating school districts of Greater Kansas City. And it's a topic that comes up for all superintendents right now because you are getting differing responses from patrons. And I would say that they too, KCPS also feels like there are equality issues and equity issues that need addressing in their schools, but how they go about it is something that they'll have to be careful in doing. That's how they've represented it to us, is that they know some attention needs to be given to it, but it's not through explicitly teaching critical race theory in the classroom that they would accomplish those goals. That's my best take on it, but it's a hot topic for all of us now.
I'll just make one last comment, and that is that I think it's possible to agree with a lot of the conclusions without agreeing with the reasoning. Now that may sound pretty bizarre, but I'm really uncomfortable with critical theory in general. If you read a little bit about it, it's largely a rejection of the Enlightenment. It's suspicious of rationality. It does not believe in objectivity. Everything is subjective in critical theory. I'm very uncomfortable with anything that suggests the Enlightenment was not a good thing. Science has been an incredible advance as far as I'm concerned. Everything that grew out of the Enlightenment is not everything, but the vast majority of it has been good for civilization.
All right. On that note, we'll bring our meeting to a close. Great topic again, Dr. Daniels. Thank you for being with us. I think we had one guest today. Bill, I think.
Yes, that was my guest. I invited some other people. That's Walt Van Assel. Walt's one of my breakfast companions. He was an assistant city manager when I came to Kansas City, and later he did 10 years with Clay County as Clay County administrator. So I thought he might be interested in seeing this presentation. So I asked Walt to come today if he had time. So sure enough, he showed up.
Well, good. Thank you for joining us as our guest today. So that was really good. So thank you. I am going to share my screen one last time here so we can do our close out our meeting here. So let me do that real quick. Next week, I want to remind everyone that we have our District 6040 Governor, David McCoffey, will be with us. So please join us for that meeting next week. And if you guys would join me in the 4-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair
to all concerned?
Will it
Build goodwill and better friendship? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
All right, everybody, we'll give you back a few minutes, and thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you, Rochelle.
Thank you.